The COVID-19 pandemic was a once-in-a-lifetime public health crisis, taking lives and livelihoods in its wake. While the world is returned to what we deem as normal, the loss and lessons from the lockdown period of the pandemic will be with us for years to come. Join us as we journey through the Eastern Caribbean islands of Dominica, Barbados, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines to reflect on when life, as we knew it, stood still.
I am Donnell Daly Alexander. I'm from the community of Barbados in the Commonwealth of Dominica. And by profession, I'm a preschool teacher. However, I also work with a non-profit organization, and I also do farming, and I do catering. I own a restaurant and bar. Well, I remember when the Prime Minister announced that the country was shutting down. And for me, it was a bit scary because we had already started hearing about all the things happening in the other countries and how quickly cases of COVID was increasing. For my community, like everywhere else, we experienced the shutdown of businesses. People had to be working from home how best they could. For us, it was a new experience because we hadn't done that in the past. For the preschool, we could not have school because children, parents would be scared. Country, well, basically was a lockdown, so we had to adhere with the protocols. It was very difficult as a business owner because you have staff to pay, you have to think about, how people eating and so on. It wasn't only the preschool for me because at that time we had just opened our restaurant and bar a year before, and COVID coming on basically forced us out of business. In the initial days when lockdown was there and so on, we had to be shut, so no money was coming in from that. But then even when it reopened and there were other restrictions, we couldn't make money as we needed to meet the overheads like rent and so on. So it was very challenging from my end.
Katisha Bristol is a young cosmetologist from Kingstown, St. Vincent. She recalled the severe mental health toll of the lockdowns in her community.
Well, for me, within my community, what I noticed at first was fear, especially those persons who were sick, who had underlying conditions. Depression played a major role from what I saw because a lot of persons lost their jobs, businesses shut down. Right. Well, basically they were forced to shut, right? So a lot of persons that caused depression. Some persons were not able to feed their families as well, and that in itself can cause depression as well, or being able to pay your bills, maintain your family, and stuff like that. Dealing with it mentally, it was a challenge.
While many communities would say that they were negatively impacted, I can speak positively about my community of Soufrière. While we all know that Soufrière is the town where persons are mostly involved in the tourism sector, and so many persons lost their jobs, we were able to see the birth of many small entrepreneurial businesses where the talents of our persons were put on display. Hence, with that, we saw hairdressers, cake makers, barbers, amongst many other businesses coming out.
Nakela Cumberbatch was a customs officer during the height of the pandemic. Now retired, she was one of the frontline workers who was tasked with working through the lockdowns. She's also living with a disability.
In the early stages of the pandemic lockdown, it was fairly hectic for me professionally because it was new terrain. We didn't know very much, and as a result, it was learning as we go. Persons would have been home, but I had to work every single day despite what was happening to the public. Initially, the community would have only been my professional life because we usually leave very early on mornings and come back very late at night. So I would have only interacted with the public as they were trying to clear their goods. Because of the pandemic, it was based on a priority and essential goods clearance, so it was fairly stressful in the professional aspect.
Many governments in the region rolled out a phased reopening of their countries in the second and third quarters of 2020, even as some borders remained closed. Dernell was happy that the daycare was allowed to reopen, although with increased costs.
As the COVID restrictions were lifted, it was a relief. There were a lot of measures that we had to put in place, a lot of increased expenses because now we had to get automatic dispensers. We had to buy the temperature check for temperature checks. We had to get new logs to record those things. So it added expenses that we didn't have before. But nonetheless, we were happy that the restrictions were lifted. We could get back in our setting. We could start making money again to cover some of the expenses that had piled up during COVID.
I would say the general public was kind of cautious because we were in shutdown for almost 3 years. So they were like, is it really safe to go outside? But they were still very much enthusiastic, ready and willing to go back out to work, but just still very cautious.
You have to sit down and hear how people are actually channeling through. Because if we don't have that support, then what are we going to do? That's why I think a lot of businesses folded during the pandemic. A lot of persons didn't have the sustainability to go on, and it was a first time thing, especially for me, a young person, right? So I had to basically figure it out on my own how I will go through a pandemic and still keep my business afloat in the future. And I should say it did pretty well, and after everything came out very good.
The Eastern Caribbean's experience with the COVID-19 pandemic makes it even clearer that our lives are intricately interconnected. What impacts one impacts us all. Across the region, there is a clear call for all governments to center the voices and the needs of those who are most marginalized in policy making, such as people living with disabilities, youth, and women-owned micro and small businesses, to ensure that their needs are met should a crisis arise.
I would like to see the government do in terms of marginalizing the youths or the people, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, is to help more in terms of be there for organizations that are in the process of actually doing something in the community, doing something for the people, like to help them in any way that they can continue to help others out there.
I would like to see the government be more prepared. I would also like to see there be put in place some sort of emergency funding, because this pandemic totally took us by surprise. No one was expecting something like this to happen. Those that are a part of the LGBT community, the elderly, those that suffered greatly from the domestic violence. There was a lot of domestic violence increase. We were not prepared for all these things, and especially those that live in the rural areas. It was especially challenging for them to get certain mundane things that they need, like their medications and their food supply.
I just want to encourage the people hearing my voice to not let down your guard, not let down our guard, that we need to plan, we need to prepare.